first request. Five days a week together.
Thank you. Hello, welcome, and please help yourself to the yummy food in the back there. If you don't know that already, I'm so sorry. I forgot to invite people. What a terrible host.
And we'll get started in maybe 5 minutes or after everyone's had a chance.
We will start in about 5 minutes. So please go get the food.
It was working, yeah.
What's your brother?
Funny, my brother's first out there took like 2 cousins all
There are 2 seats in the front row if anybody needs a spot to sit.
Michael, you're going to sit in front.
No, somebody important needs to go there.
Already.
We're a friend as well.
I think you should scare people. Should I start now?
Sure.
Why are these chairs empty? Hi, Jessie, you have to sit there.
Okay, but I can't sit
It makes me feel good.
I can only sit a little bit because the students are clamoring for us today.
I see.
But I want to support.
I would like to read our land acknowledgements first. Our campuses are resigned on the unceded territories of the Aquan, Tan Kwan, and Shika Kwan Ontinkit Ani, also known as Juneau, Ketchikan, and Sitka, Alaska. Sorry, Davina, you taught me the names, but I don't think I did a good job. You're doing great. Adjacent to the ancestral home of the Sadas and Chinchian people, we honor the relationship that exists between Tlingit, Sadas, and Chinchian people and their sovereign relationship to their land, their languages, their ancestors, and future generations. We aspire to work toward healing and liberation, recognizing our paths are intertwined in the complex histories of colonization in Alaska. We acknowledge that we arrived here by listening to the peoples from the past, and these stories carry us as we weave a healthier world for future generations. Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, and students, my name is Nguyệt Nguyen. I teach history at UAS. This event is the last of the series of events organized around the Waging Peace in Vietnam exhibit, which is located in the main library space as well as in the room next door. If you have not seen the exhibit, I encourage you to do so. I was born and raised in Vietnam after the war, but I felt as though I lived it. My physics teacher told me that a bomb fragment missed her shoulders by a couple of inches when she was 11. My father went out to the Gulf of Tonkin in 1972 to demine the waters that were mined by the U.S. My grandparents had to move into the mountains because there were caves for them to hide from U.S. bombers. They finally moved out of the mountains in 1991. The city I grew up in was filled with historical artifacts. One would randomly and casually see a mound of sandbags left over from the time when it was used for anti-aircraft artillery, or a rusted loudspeaker on top of a tree for when it was used to warn people of incoming bombers, or an open-air shrine to mourn the deaths of hundreds of people that were killed in one airstrike as they gathered in a hospital. After I arrived in this country, I had been told by a friend in Oregon that he hated the war because the U.S. had lost. I guess if the U.S. had won, all the killing and destruction would have been fine by him. I have also been told by a Jewish lawyer in Philadelphia that he commended John McCain for having forgiven the Vietnamese. Needless to say, I have had to process a lot of information over the years being here in this country. I feel that there's a lot of unspoken and unresolved pain surrounding this conflict. In this country in particular, people rushed to move on and try to forget about the war. That's understandable. However, to do so requires a lot of collective reckoning. One can't really move on unless one is willing to take a hard look at what happened and why. Therefore, I feel incredibly grateful that UAF was sponsoring this exhibit. Not just because it was important to me personally, but also because it helps us to revive a much-needed conversation about the Vietnam War. With all that being said, I now would like you to join me in welcoming Chancellor Karen Carey, who will deliver her remarks.
Thank you, Wynn. So, as you can tell, I grew up during this era, and it had a major impact on my life. And I know that some of you were concerned about why we put up the warning signs. When I heard that this exhibit was coming to campus, I immediately thought of the My Lai massacre. And my mind immediately went to those pictures. And I was concerned for our students who may not have known about these events, that if they walked around the corner and saw some of those disturbing images, that it would cause them some issues. Because it certainly did for me, having grown up in that period of time. I see some of you out there that probably served in the war. Thank you for your service. Thank you for those who did not. But I also see many young faces here. And this was a very important time in our history. And I think it's a very important event to remember. It was a long time. And as a college student during those days, I had a number of friends who had low draft numbers, were drafted to go to war, did not come home. I had other friends who had high draft numbers and didn't go at all. So I really praise the students who are here today for being engaged in this project, and I really hope that you will learn more about this and help Wynn on her path and her research as we go forward. I believe all war is unnecessary, and that's the beauty of university, where we can sit down and we can dialogue on issues even if we don't agree. But it's important to have the dialogue, and we don't have to pick up arms. So thank you all for being here today, and I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Dr. Kerr. Now I would like to invite my colleague, Jonas Lamb, who will be running our session today. Jonas has been instrumental in the success of this exhibit and all these events, and I can't thank him enough. Here's Jonas.
Thank you, Whit. Don't hide. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to collaborate with Wynn on this amazing undertaking, and I would encourage everyone, just say yes when someone asks you, oh, do you want to be involved in this, bringing this exhibit to the library, or starting conversations on your campus about a war that happened 50 years ago. You might get in over your head, but chances are you'll learn a lot and you'll grow. So I am a firm believer in saying yes. So I have some introductory remarks before I'll introduce some of the folks that were involved in sponsoring the student contest. I'll invite them to come up with me, and we will present the awards to the prize winners for the student contest. Have a photo op. We'll hear from our guest judge, Ron Heiberle, who will be joining us via Zoom. And we will have an opportunity for students to read their work, some of the winning students. You are invited, but not required. I am also very happy to read for you, if you prefer. So thank you everyone for coming to our symposium and closing reception for the Waging Peace in Vietnam exhibit. My name is Jonas Lamb. I work at the Egan Library. I recognize a lot of you. Thank you for using our space. We're happy to be there for you. I am very fortunate to have had this opportunity to collaborate with Whitwind to pull together this very important exhibit, to work with the UAS Writing Center. Thank you, Jesse Goodman, and a small army of UAS faculty and staff, along with some incredible community volunteers who got down on their knees to assemble very large easels with me in the library to put the exhibit up. I'm grateful. So we've come together this afternoon to continue a conversation about a war that happened 50 years ago and yet has very little closure. Through the exhibit's depictions of the GI resistance and the stories and experiences of our guest speakers and community members at the various Waging Peace events, we've realized that there is still much to learn from this war and from each other to ensure that we're not revisiting these themes in another 50 years in the context of yet another conflict. It's also become apparent through the stories shared that the Vietnam War has touched the lives of so many of us. And I want to share a brief personal story of my experience in the historical wake of the war. While the details are a bit fuzzy, I remember my first exposure to the Vietnam War. It was 1991. And I was a know-it-all 5th grader living in Michigan. I told my teacher I was going to do some research and then write a book about the Vietnam War so that I could understand what really happened. My ambitious project was largely inspired by a popular TV show at the time called Tour of Duty, which featured the Rolling Stones' Paint It Black as its theme song. It was probably over my head. The show explored some of the confused politics of the time, as well as racism, civilian deaths, and how the lives of soldiers were permanently impacted. I recall my trips to the library had left me frustrated as I attempted to pore over history books that were way over my head and that I could not understand. Despite my hours of reading, I felt I was getting no closer to understanding, even at a fundamental level, who were the bad guys and why was the US involved? Imagine my shock when I went to my dad for help sorting it all out. I learned at the time that he had paid his way through college by participating in ROTC between 1966 and 1970, and he graduated as a second lieutenant. After graduation, he was ordered to basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, but was then granted 1 year of deferment because his father had recently been diagnosed with a brain tumor. Following my grandfather's death in 1971, my dad completed his basic training, but fortunately was given the opportunity to serve in the Army Reserves rather than deploy to Vietnam. My dad shared this story with me in 1991. The same year he was diagnosed with melanoma, and we spent our evenings in the Detroit suburbs watching the fireworks show of Tomahawk cruise missiles lighting up the sky of Baghdad on live TV. As Operation Desert Shield and the Gulf War played out on national TV, I remember my classmates turning on each other in confusion. Our friends were Chaldean Iraqis who had fled their country for religious freedom. Yet our country was at war in Iraq. War was a tough puzzle to figure out at age 11. It hasn't gotten a whole lot easier over the years. So we've come together today to recognize and celebrate the voices of UAS students who not only engaged with the exhibit, the films and the speakers, but they also responded thoughtfully and critically to express what the exhibit means to them and its lessons for today. And let me tell you, I'm very excited to hear some of these students share their work with you later in the program. So at this time, I'd like to introduce some of the sponsors of the Waging Peace Student Contest who will assist me as we recognize the prize winners. The Waging Peace Student Contest is graciously sponsored by donations from the Veterans for Peace Juneau chapter and an individual donation by Mike Gerchevsky. The prize winners in attendance today are invited to come up and receive your prize from one of the sponsors, and we'll ask that you stay for a group photo. And following the photo, sponsors will be invited to share some remarks about why they chose to sponsor this event. We have, I wrote 3, but maybe 4. We have several members of the Veterans for Peace Juneau chapter with us today. And we also, I believe, have Mike Gerchevsky joining us via Zoom. I will, if you gentlemen will please join me following some brief introductions and then remain up here as we recognize our prize winners. Paul D. Slover of the Veterans for Peace. At 18, Paul received his military draft notice while halfway through his senior year in high school. After relentless contacts from a U.S. Air Force recruiter, he enlisted and served from 1966 through 1970. Early on in his enlistment, he began to hear, read about, and witness the devastating effects of the Vietnam War and began to question its necessity and morality. After his release from his service, he participated in demonstrations against the military-industrial complex, U.S. military involvement in Indochina and elsewhere. In 1977, he was a founding member of the Alaskans for World Peace, and in 2002, the Veterans for Peace Chapter 100 here in Juneau. John Dunker, also of Veterans of Peace. John was born in Chicago in 1942. Me too, just not 1942. And he received his BS in forestry from Michigan Tech University in 1964. He enlisted in the U.S. Army Aviator Pre-Enlistment Agreement in August of 1964 and spent 1 year in combat in Vietnam between 65 and 66 and was then posted to Fort Wainwright in Fairbanks, Alaska in November of 1966, where he served until separation in 1968. John worked and lived in Fairbanks until 1978, completed graduate studies at UBC in Vancouver before moving to Juneau in 1981, where he raised a family. He's married with 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren. He's a proud grandfather there. Is Don with us today? Don Gottschall? Thank you, Don. Is Don Gottschall also a Veterans for Peace? Don spent his early career as a hydropower engineer, designing and estimating the cost of dams and power plants for economic comparison with other types of power generation in Alaska. Later, he served as a construction manager for the City of Juneau's municipal projects, and after his 3rd retirement, really want to hear about the other retirements, he led volunteer construction projects in Alaska, Mississippi, Texas, Mexico, and Guatemala. He committed to peace and nonviolence, or his commitment to peace and nonviolence is shaped by his military service after college. Several years in the military was enough to convince him that killing people does not solve problems. His current hobby is turning wood bowls, which sometimes turn out to be art by accident. Is KJ with us today? Thanks, KJ. KJ Metcalf, Veterans for Peace. He shared this statement of hope with us. War and atomic weapons are both the symbolic and the actual threat that can end life on our planet. I believe the possibility of using these weapons is now as great as any time since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The global elimination of this threat is imperative. As I reach 88 years of age, I realize that this task must be passed on to more energetic, informed, and tech-savvy youth. My hope is that young people's determination and confidence will create a clear and effective voice for a non-violent nuclear-free world. My generation tried. May you, the younger generation, be successful. And then we have Mike Gurchevsky joining us on Zoom. Mike was opposed to the Vietnam War during the conflict, and since the war's end has been active in helping various projects to deal with its legacies, such as Project Renew, which works to clean up unexploded ordnance, as well as provide risk education, victim assistance, and policy advocacy. I'll invite the folks from Veterans for Peace to come up and join me. Your financial assistance, for sharing your stories, for getting me a little in trouble in the library for making a racket by learning history from primary sources. It was
Sorry about that.
It's a good thing, good problem to have. All right. I'm just flying along here. All right, here we go. So now, with the help of these fine gentlemen, I have the privilege to announce the winners of the UAS Waging Peace in Vietnam Student Contest. There were 12 outstanding entries to the contest from students at all 3 UAS campuses. The entries were read blindly by a panel of 3 UAS faculty judges, who then forwarded their top 5 on to our guest judge, Ron Haverly, to select the top 3. The students were invited to explore the exhibit and to attend films and events with guest lecturers and describe what the exhibit means to them and its lessons that they took away today. The top 5 entries will be recognized today. However, the other 7 participants will also receive a complimentary copy of this Waging Peace in Vietnam companion book.
Allison's gift.
Okay, and some UAS pin bling from the creative department, thank you, and $25. The prize winners who are in attendance are invited to come up and receive your prize from one of the sponsors. We'll ask that you linger momentarily so we can get a group photo. And we do have, I believe, a prize winner on Zoom, so we'll try to acknowledge them when we get there. So I'll begin with, we have 2 honorable mentions to award. These come with a $50 prize and a companion book. And a pin. So the first honorable mention goes to Sophia Gim for her essay, Art and Expression.
Would you like to hand her to, hand this, would you like to hand it to her? Yeah. Can you please?
Yeah, we'll have you stay up there. Our second honorable mention goes to Alexander Xander Healy for his essay, Learning from Resistance of the Vietnam War.
There you go. Okay, no, not me. So this way. Oh, photo.
Do it again. No, I'm just
Do it
kidding.
again. There you go.
Thank you.
I got my number, I could go.
I'll give you guys a heads up. You want to know which one's coming next? No spoilers. Third prize, it's a $150 award, goes to Junie Chup for the poem Chessboard. And I believe Junie maybe joining us on Zoom.
Yeah, she is.
If we stand aside, maybe we can just check in and say hi to Junie. Are you with us, Junie? Okay. Congratulations, Junie.
Right, we will find a way to send you this. Okay.
All right, second prize which is a $300 award, goes to Josie Zulo for the essay, The Vietnam War, American Imperialism. You don't have them in alphabetical order?
I put them in order.
Congratulations. And first prize in the Waging Peace Student Essay Contest, it's a $500 award, goes to Adonis Scalia for the essay. Maybe if we could just have everybody gather in front of the TV, maybe we'll do a quick photo with the winners. I don't know if we can we put Junie on the screen? Or I'm sorry.
Junie,
Yeah,
Sure
can we
can.
put Junie on the screen? Thanks, Laura. Maybe just give her a little bit of a berth there.
If she unmutes her mic, she'll show up.
Okay, Junie, if you just unmute yourself so that you'll be the speaker. There you go. We won't make you say anything, but that should give you, should let us see you. Thank you. All right. Is that going to work, Allison? You need these gentlemen to squish.
A little bit together, the students.
I want to stand behind because I'm tall.
Okay, everybody in? Everybody, actually, I brought that.
I just got a message from the curator. The curator would like the winner to take a photo, to have a photo with the chancellor.
Okay.
If it's-
Special opportunity. Here, we're going to step out of your way.
Terrific. Let's look at this backdrop over there.
Oh, he does? Why not you? Okay.
Yes.
Let's do
Apparently,
it
we need to be in the photo.
in front of the Waging Peace
Okay.
backdrop.
Can you go back to your seat?
Don't get too comfy. I'll call somebody else momentarily. We can get this out. Doesn't want to roll. Okay. Will that work?
Everybody in front or around or something. All right. This is great. Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
All right, well, I suggested that people not get comfortable. So now I'm going to invite any of our sponsors. I believe maybe Paul DeSlover from Veterans for Peace may want to say a few words about the sponsorship. And then next we'll invite Mike Gerchevsky to share some brief remarks. Thank you, Paul.
Speaking for Veterans for Peace, Juneau Chapter 100, we were honored to co-sponsor this entire event with the university. Not only was the exhibit a powerful display, but also we had speakers and we had other seminars for students and members of the public to participate. But the most important thing we had was a platform for the students to find out about what happened during the Vietnam War. That there were brave women and men in uniform who protested what was happening then to them and to our country, despite having the possibility of being court-martialed and all the implications with a court-martial, and the possibility of going to prison. So you've all learned about some very brave people during that period. And I think it's important to know that and remember that if ever there is another occasion, which unfortunately it probably will be, where you or other Americans are called to fight in a war that is not a moral war. So anyway, Veterans for Peace is really happy of all the participation that we've had with this event, and glad that so many students have taken part and witnessed a part of history that some of us were actually involved in. Thank you.
Want to hear Ron Aberly?
We were hoping to hear from Mike Grachewski if he's available and interested.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, during the Vietnam War, I was a 20-year-old college student, and I just happened to have a high lottery number when they had the lottery, and so I did not go to war. And my feelings about the war changed during the war because some of my friends went to war and they came home and they started saying this is not a very good thing that we're involved with there. So I took it from them that they knew what they were talking about because they had actually been to Vietnam and participated in the war. So after the war, I decided it was my duty to try and get rid of landmines and unexploded ordnance in the Vietnamese provinces, and that's what I'm involved with these days. And thank you for letting me be part of the symposium.
Thank you, Mike. So up next, I'd like to thank and acknowledge all of the contest judges, including our UAS judges, Melissa Dolis, Assistant Professor of Psychology, Forrest Wagner, Associate Professor of Outdoor Studies and Humanities, Bill Urquhart, Associate Professor of Sociology and Social Sciences. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our guest judge, and then I will invite him to address the room. Ron Haberly, our guest judge and photographer, was drafted into the U.S. Army in March 1966 and honorably discharged in April of 1968. During his service as Army photographer, he documented the atrocities of the My Lai massacre. Following his discharge, Haberly offered the photos to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which published some of them on November 20th, 1969. Haberly sold additional photos to Life magazine, which were published in the December 5th, 1969 issue. Haberly's photos are credited with turning American public opinion against the war. He continued his work as a photographer and as a hobby after his discharge, and he has traveled over 2,500 miles on a bicycle in Southeast Asia. So I will ask you to help me welcome our guest judge, Ron Haberly.
So I'm on screen, I can't say much.
Oh, there you are. We see you now, Ron. Or as long as you're talking, we'll see you.
Not yet. Okay, finally I'm on screen, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for letting me be the judge of these essays. And I mean, they're really interesting. I had 3 of them to read. And it's pretty hard trying to find which one I really made the most meaning to me. And finally it was the one that I really liked called Reflections. So it was a really good job writing for all the students in that. I know most of you people are interested in what happened in My Lai, and believe me, we still don't know 100% which happened there that day. There's a lot of books out that you people can go ahead and read, and I'll give you one that's going to give you a really good what happened in My Lai. That's the book by Kevin Sims and Michael Bilton, 4 Hours in My Lai. Really a good book to read. And another one that you might want to get interested in is Killing Anything That Moves, and that's by Nick Turst. That gives you more of a scale of what happened outside of My Lai. And there were many more massacres in My Lai. It's size of them, you really don't know. But you know what happened in My Lai? There was 504 people, or civilians, I should say, men, old men, women, babies, children that were killed there that day. And the operation didn't happen all in My Lai 4, which everybody seems to say My Lai 4, My Lai 4. It happened into a hamlet of Bin Tay, which is just outside of My Lai 4, and another hamlet over by the East China Sea, Mai Thi province, where over 100 people were killed. And that was done by a different company, called Company B. So it's, just don't think of Mr. Calley as the person, the one committing all these atrocities. There were other officers involved in this, and it was just a whole group of soldiers that committed these atrocities. And if you really want to do some real heavy research, you get into the Pierce Inquiry, which was by General Pierce. He was assigned to do an investigation of what happened in My Lai. And there's over 30 books on the testimony of soldiers and that, which really, what's happened there that day, if you really want to get into the research on this. And also here, really, I think the most interesting part, if you're doing investigative reporting, is to go into the original testimonies that were collected by the Criminal Investigation Division of the Army when they first started researching this, what happened at My Lai and that. But the problem is, they sort of censored all this right now. The only place you can really get the information from, where I found out, is from the King's College, which is in London, England. And they have taken the names of every person that they have a transcript on and just assigned a number. So you really don't know, when you read it, who the person is that committed the atrocities. They're told stories about other people committing atrocities. All in all, what happened in My Lai did not have to happen. And that's my opinion on this. It's just something that's just got out of control. And I'm going to blame it on one thing. It's called revenge. Because what happened before with Charlie Company in the beginning, they kept taking many casualties of their own troops. Landmines, sniper, and the soldiers become very hardened against the people in Vietnam. And that day in My Lai, they took the revenge out on the civilians. That was their way of getting even from what happened to their prior soldiers. And what really set them off, that I found out to be the key to it, was favorite sergeant on 15th was walked into a landmine that they feel that the enemies in that My Lai 4 knew that the mine was there, and of course he lost his life and cut up other soldiers. And the meeting that they had back at headquarters and that I found out that there was a chance to go into My Lai 4 on March 16th because they're supposed to meet up hardcore BC. Well, that never happened. All this in the village was just civilians. That was it. So if you have any questions about, you want to ask about My Lai, feel free to ask.
No pressure. Are there any questions for Ron Haverly? Sure. Just speak up, Xander.
Where was My Lai geographically located in Vietnam?
That was Quang Ngai, Vietnam. That was what they call at the time the I Corps area. It was close to the East China Sea. Now called the East Sea. No more China word in the sea part.
Any other questions? Maybe I would just ask Ron if you wouldn't mind speaking briefly about any sort of challenges or conflict that you encountered. I read that you maybe had 2 cameras that day in My Lai, and how navigating the personal versus your responsibility as an Army photographer impacted your decision to release those photos.
Well, I was questioned on, I think it was August 25th of 1969 by the Criminal Investigation Division of the Army. And the head investigator pretty much figured out they knew knew that, photographs were taken of the massacre. So I started, explaining to him, yes, I have photographs. And he in turn started explaining to me what happened there that day. The parts that I didn't, I couldn't even comprehend happened. The part that really turned me off, and I decided at the time to release the photographs, is when I found about the mutilations of the bodies, the rapes, and some of the parts about the killing of the small babies and that, and what happened in the area that I didn't really be able to go through at the time. It was just horrible. I mean, I just couldn't see that, especially the rapes of the children as young as 9 years old, 10 years old, teenagers. And when they explained afterwards, after they raped them, they either shot them, and one thing that really turned me off was the slitting of the vagina after a small child was raped. So at that time, I figured, civilians or people back home should really, learn about what's happening there that day. To me, that's not war.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ron? Here, one more from Xander.
What was the initial reaction to the releasing of the pictures, and how exactly did you release them?
I released them to the Cleveland Plain Dealer because I had a friend I went to college with, and his name was Joe Esterhaus, and I'm sure some of you've known him because after he became a reporter in that, and later on he went into the movie industry and that, and some of his movies he made, like Flashdance, and there's a couple other. But I sort of confided in him, explained everything that went on, and he didn't believe me at the time until he called down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and talked to the prosecutor of Cali, and he confirmed that what I was saying was the truth. So there, after that, we decided to go to Life magazine, and initially we ended up selling the photographs to Life magazine.
Yeah.
You portray this as a moral breakdown of the soldiers, and I always thought it was just a gung-ho thing of teaching young officers and so forth there. That's a distinction for me.
I agree with that date. On March 16th, it was a complete breakdown. I mean, you had a general flying overhead in his helicopter, so he could view what was going on the ground. Other officers were flying the helicopter above, but nobody did anything to try to stop it except for Hugh Thompson.
Where did that come from?
Jason?
I think.
Sure, go ahead, John.
Yeah, to Ron, you're being a witness, we all know it must have been traumatic. And in your work since then, I have to assume also, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, has been a therapeutic as well as a useful service to society. But I hope you're doing well with coping with your experience, Ron. Thank you.
I feel I have no problem dealing with this because throughout going to college and that, I love reading about history and what happens throughout different wars and that. It basically happens in every war, but I don't think it happens on this scale. So I've been able to deal with it. I keep myself active in that, so I'm doing pretty good with everything.
I've got a question. Sure. To what extent, if they did it at all, did the Army try to prevent you from releasing the information that you had?
They really didn't. They didn't try anything for me. Even contact me to try to stop me from releasing the photographs and that. I received no communication from the Army at all.
All right, maybe if there's one more question for Ron, and then we'll transition to the next part of our program.
Or we could have a Q&A after.
Sure, yeah, yeah.
And so we have no questions, but we do have a few comments and congratulations on the live stream. I
Okay.
don't know that we need to read them.
Okay, thank you. From the, particularly for the prize winners?
Just in general, so proud of UAS Juneau campus for lifting the wage and peace in Vietnam month-long exhibit, guest lectures, and healing discussions about our historic world events. Gunashish, Professor Nguyen, we got a woohoo. Yeah, this has been an excellent symposium. So proud of our amazing faculty, staff, and students. A couple of applause. And congratulations, everyone. Donald Spur and Charles Gamble, who the UAS Joint Use Rec Center is named after, were young Juneau servicemen who lost their lives in this conflict.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, folks tuning in to the live stream for those comments. And I do just want to take a moment to kind of apologize maybe and recognize an oversight that, you know, we've been dealing with some really challenging topics this whole month with this exhibit, particularly with the exhibit related to the My Lai massacre. And we probably should have had a conversation about, you know, topics that could be raised at this symposium. And I know some of what Ron Haverly shared was probably quite shocking and stunning. So apologize for not giving folks warning that that was bound to happen. So. All right, so next in the program, I would like to invite some of our student contest winners up to share your work. For those with longer essays, feel free to share an excerpt of your choosing. I'm happy to read for those of you that would prefer that option. And readers are also invited to share a little bit about yourself, maybe your area of study, your year of study, where you're from, or other items that might be more significant to you that you'd like to share. And then maybe at the conclusion of your reading, if you would also just indicate if you're willing to take comments or questions from the audience. So I do think we have Junie Chuck was interested in reading, and maybe for the sake of transitions to Zoom, Junie, are you up for going first?
Yeah, that works for me.
Thank you.
So hi, I'm Junie Chu. I wrote a poem about Operation Menu, which is kind of a consequence of what happened over in Vietnam. It regards the B-52 bombings of Cambodia. I'm Cambodian, so this is somewhat biographical. And this is my first time reading a poem out loud to anybody, so this is kind of nerve-wracking. Okay, so the poem is called Chessboard. My father sits beneath a bamboo table, eyeing scraps that fall from brother's lips. A starving beast opposite follows his gaze and calibrates its hips. As the jungle air imbues with moisture, the fire dimmer in the thickening night, brother number 10 commands my father, young comrade, make us more light. Deploying from the dirt below, my father stokes the timid, dying flame, as the opportunistic dog gnaws the chicken skin, smiling menacingly. We won this game. Then the night deepens to black. Brother's red fama turns to ash. My father scrambles to set a spark. His tiny frame cannot endure another lash. Suddenly, the sky opens up, red, orange, black. The thunder of 100 shells, the deafening blitz of attack. Palm trees ablaze like torches, refracting smoke in the rice paddies. Khmer Rouge soldiers rise from their posts. No full day could be spent at ease. Tonight's fiery menu of operation, some spying for Chef of Staff Johnson, a fallacious drizzle of pacification, a kiss of Nixon's Vietnamization. Meat harvested from rural pastures, soaked in gasoline, flambeaued to hue. Wine red blood spills, just one slice, we've topped with the freshest B-52. As the cacophony of death swallows the village, jets above roaring like sick elephants.
Soldiers dig out their graves while politicians don't even wince. These ponds grid mark the countryside as their kings and queens survey the horde. No plan or strategy will save this land when they've deemed it the chessboard. My father hides beneath a bamboo table, awaiting what fate has left for him in store. The sky opens up and sternly announces, "You're a bystander in another's war." Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for being brave and reading for the first time in front of these people. I'm sorry for mispronouncing your last name. Would you like to answer any questions or take any comments?
Yeah, I can take a few questions or comments. And for the record, my dad pronounces our last name differently than I do, so it's tough for everyone.
Maybe I'll start with one.
Okay.
Did you feel it was easier to write about a historical event or maybe a family memory in poetry rather than try to write it as an essay?
That's a really great question. I actually have been debating writing a graphic novel about my father's experience of escaping from Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge conflict. And I had started it and then didn't really get anywhere with it. And this seemed like a really good opportunity to try a new medium. And so it was really fun. And I would say it was harder in a way because you want to use less words, but easier in a way because you can say a lot with just a few words.
Great, thank you. I can't wait till we can see your graphic novel.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Junie?
I have one.
Sure.
So from your poem, I feel like you have a lot of specific information, knowledge about the war. So is that because you've taken classes on the topic, or is it because this is a kind of conversation that you grew up with?
Yeah, I have not taken any classes about this, but it is information that I grew up learning and being interested in due to having heard all my parents' stories and just like a lifelong interest in why I'm here in America. So I did add a lot of, I guess you could call them Easter eggs to the poem. There's things in there, if you look at the poem visually, that look like spelling errors, but they're actually all intentional.
Well, I imagine we'll connect with the winners and talk about your comfort posting your essays or your poems maybe on a website so that we can share that with a broader audience. Thank you so much, Junie.
Thank you.
So we have many winners in the room. I don't want to make anybody, I have alphabetical order here, so that would make, so Faya Gim next, if you're interested in reading, you can kindly decline.
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, that's cool.
Sorry, I forgot to offer that earlier.
Hello, I'm Sophia. I'm an English major at UAS, and I'm from Wasilla, so it's a crowd. Okay, so my essay is called Art and Expression Despite War and Violence. So while walking through the Wage and Peace in Vietnam exhibit, I felt myself enter through a door of history I had not been exposed to so viscerally before. The dramatic black and white portraits peering over my shoulder as I read these soldiers' experiences urged me to think introspectively about myself and the ability I have to walk through a silent, tranquil library filled with raw accounts of history. The contrast between the environment and what I was reading struck me as I shifted past each block of text detailing injustices, discrimination, and the racism that has plagued many eras of history. I saw the immense similarities between what modern and past protests aim to accomplish, expression of oneself, and the need to speak against grievances. As I completed a circle around each display, I finally stood in front of the Who Has a Better Right to Oppose the War anti-war poster created by Richard Avedon and Martin Israel. Immediately, I was sucked into the vibrant and bold contrast between the rich blue background and pungent red uniform cloaking David Courtwright. I have always held a strong interest in art and any form of self-expression and knew that this poster piqued my interest. Each time I walked through the Egan Library, I noticed my eyes tended to drift their focus to this poster. And now I was being confronted with the Andy Warhol-esque, exuberant, and intensely thought-provoking poster I finally had a moment to stand in front of. Upon meeting the gaze of Courtwright, I was transported to a moment in time when opposition of violence was not commonplace for most involved with the war. The symbolic value of the dove, the warm and cool tones fighting against one another for the viewer's attention, and the tone of the poster enveloped me in its desperate plea for peace. This sentiment was my most important takeaway from this experience, as I was able to connect to a time distant from my own with a moment of remembrance and contemplation. After this experience, I found it remarkable that I, along with many other viewers of the exhibit, was able to connect and share the same values from individuals from a time I was not a part of. That in itself is the purpose of artistic expression. Through written accounts, photographs, and numerous art pieces, the ability to speak against the world and its values is something that cannot be lost no matter the trauma that accompanies it. I feel that acknowledgement of even the most cataclysmic events in history must remain alive and active through interpretation, conversation, and awareness of the subsequent effects. Upholding this, a single voice is created, a voice for peace. Do there happen to be questions or comments? Thank you.
All right, up next, if willing, Xander Healy, read his essay, Learning from Resistance of the Vietnam War.
Hello. Learning from Resistance of the Vietnam War. We live in a world of violence. Existing nations and empires seek to only further their power and presence. The people of these nations must be convinced by lies and propaganda to go along with violence, but sometimes holes in the walls of propaganda open, and truth trickles in. Sometimes the human instruments of war quit, and the violence is resisted. In the Vietnam War, there was untold violence and destruction. There was inspiring resistance to these terrible things. However, it failed to end the war quickly. It wasn't enough to save millions of innocents that perished. Today, another empire is seeking to project itself. In Ukraine, there is also great violence. There is also great resistance by Russian civilians to end their country's terrorism. What is unknown if it can stop the war? Decades ago, from 1955 to 1975, America attempted to force its will on Vietnam through warfare. The U.S. Empire's violence was challenged by their own soldiers and many others. Sometimes the resistance violence was direct, killing/threatening those who would order the brutality. Fraggings happened many times throughout the war. Soldiers would be ordered by their superiors to enter combat or commit violence. These soldiers would threaten their superiors with grenades to warn them not to push their power. First, they would place the grenade in their officer's office. This warns the superior of the consequences of their actions. If that did not work, they would then destroy their superior's office with a grenade while they weren't there. The final measure would often be lethal, blowing up the officer. This could be made to look like an accident and was difficult to trace back to any individual. Usually this would be done by enlisted men. Racist officers enthusiastic about violence, and generally the most dictatorial among them would be targeted. Other kinds of resistance during the war weren't as direct. Over 300 anti-war newspapers were made. often being distributed in U.S. military bases, such as the Bragg's Brief, located in Fort Bragg. Vietnam was one of the first wars that could be easily photographed and documented by an individual reporter. The stark difference between the propaganda the military showed and the reality found by these journalists made many feel obligated to spread the truth far and wide. They're often organized by the American GIs who are emotionally motivated by the evil on display in Vietnam. It took time for truth to trickle into the populace, but when it did, there was an increase of anti-war efforts. Countering propaganda is an important step in stopping imperialist aggression. The government chose to counter this anti-war sentiment, to retain control, and to keep the war effort strong. American President Richard Nixon instituted a draft to force young, able-bodied men to go to war, willing or not. People found ways to resist the draft. Filing for conscientious objector status was sometimes difficult, though many did. Through injuring oneself, one could be deemed unfit for war and not be drafted. A sort of underground railroad was made for by anti-war groups, often at universities, to get drafted people out of the country. Whether out of self-interest or out of anti-war beliefs, I believe that all resistance to drafting was a valid resistance to war. Approximately 570,000 young men were classified by the government as draft offenders. Personal autonomy and safety should be celebrated. I believe many of those who resisted draft or went AWOL were heroic. Yet the government made efforts to jail and shame those who did. At stockades like Long Bin Jail, they would keep people who went AWOL in terrible conditions. Meager, disgusting, abusive, racist guards, and forced labor were fundamental parts of these facilities. Resistance to this crime against humanity should be expected. Riots were relatively common and furious. The government's force of their will can only go so far unchallenged. When an imperialist state attempts to force its people to commit unjust violence, there will be resistance. The state will either fold to the resistance or seek to punish it. Another imperialist nation is currently trying to project its power at the cost of the lives of many innocent people, both domestic and foreign. The Russo-Ukrainian War is a recent ongoing conflict. It is unjustified and aggressive on Russia's behalf. The resistance to this war has been great enough that Russia's President Vladimir Putin has instituted a draft. Though the information being chaotic, covered up, and fresh, it can be hard to get exact numbers. But we do know that there is great resistance to the Russian invasion. The tactic of injuring oneself to avoid the draft is being practiced en masse. With the search "How to Break One's Arm at Home" reaching record high levels on Russian internet. Thousands have fled to neighboring countries. There are reports of a Russian commander being run over and killed by his own soldiers. Something different about this conflict is that millions of civilians are armed with small digital cameras. Now with smartphones, much of the brutality of the conflict can be easily documented. This can be used to spread anti-war sentiment amongst the people. I am greatly inspired by the resistance to violence in the Vietnam War. My hope is that Russians also feel inspired to resist. American resistance failed to end the war soon enough to help millions that perished from our imperialist aggression. America brutally bombed, shot, burned, and tortured their way through Vietnam for nearly 2 decades. Perhaps through resistance to this war, we can preserve the lives of those endangered by the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Russians can learn from the failures and successes of American resistance to preserve the lives of so many and preserve their own innocence. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Yes. What was your level of curiosity or interest led you down the path of kind of making the connection between this current war that you're living through and the exhibit that you saw?
I'm part of a political thing on Discord called Progressive Victory 2022. Through this Discord, I have met two people from Ukraine, one in the south side of Kiev, another one from around Kherson. I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, in both of their experiences, I found, well, I took interest in that. So, and I think that I would consider myself anti-imperialist, and I think that it's important for us to learn from history, and I think that this is a clear example of what we did in Vietnam, imperialist aggression. And we should be able to learn from the tactics used to, resist previous imperialism to resist modern imperialism.
Next, if willing, our first prize winner, reading the essay Reflection. I think I've got a copy of it.
So to briefly introduce myself, my name is Adonis. I'm a marine biology major with a minor in creative writing, and I'm from Mississippi. For the sake of brevity, I'll kind of just read the intro. This essay is called Reflection. While looking into the solemn black and white portrait of a Vietnam veteran, I thought to myself, what do I know about the Vietnam War? I scoured my brain for any kind of remnants from a high school history class, any type of information that I learned about the realities of Vietnam, the political climate at the time, or life at home. Standing under the sad, contemplative eyes of that portrait, I felt ashamed. There was nothing. I took my seat as the snow outside slowed into a dull rain. Looking around, surrounded by older people, mostly veterans, the reality hit me. Not everyone can afford the luxury of not thinking about the atrocities of the Vietnam War. During the reading, the poem hit me especially hard. As a poet myself, I felt as I understood what was being communicated. The tenderness of the medium in juxtaposition with the harsh reality of the war. The combination was beautiful and quiet. Here in the silence, I reflected. Why don't I know about the Vietnam War? What can I learn? So the essay goes on to reflect on that.
So if you were going to say in spoken language, what did you reflect upon?
So I took a lot of time to reflect on mostly like the actual events of the Vietnam War, like what went on, but also a little bit about why is the Vietnam War kind of skimmed over. I feel like I had a pretty solid high school education, but not once was the Vietnam War ever something that I learned in a history class. And I don't know if that was just my high school or just what I learned, but I feel like the Vietnam War was pretty skimmed over despite it being a really pivotal part in American history. So I talked a little bit about the actual events of the war and also why those were breezed over.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I can if you'd like.
We're thinking about posting it on the website.
Oh,
Yeah. It's 5+ pages, so.
yeah, it's kind of long, so. But yes, it's completely
wonderful.
okay to post that if
Okay.
anybody wants to read the complete essay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And lastly, if willing, I would invite Josie Zulo to read the essay, The Vietnam War, American Imperialism, or you're welcome to have a stand-in. Looks like she's willing. Thank you, Josie. I've got a copy of it on the podium for you there. Yeah.
government told their citizens that the war was necessary, the draft was necessary, that communism would spread and terrorize the world if it was not eradicated in Vietnam. Communism is an idea, it's not a physical object. You can't bomb or kill an idea. You can only kill the people that believe in it, and the ones unlucky enough to be standing next to them. This is what the government means when they speak about eradicating dangerous ideologies, killing or punishing people who believe in something they deem to be a threat to their power. Violence should never be the solution to an idea, dialogue is. If someone is telling you, here are the enemies, question what it is that the person telling you that stands to gain from you attacking these enemies. Remember that everyone is human, everyone is capable of believing propaganda, and everyone is capable of coming out of it. You don't have to fight anyone, nor should you be asked to. Any questions or comments? Xander?
Which exhibits did you see in one particular?
I went to the one in the library, and mostly I just talked to my grandfather. I never actually really talked to him about the war. I mean, not intentionally, it just wasn't something he was ready to talk about. So, thanks.
Did he know about the exhibit?
He did, and he did visit it, and it was very painful for him, but he was very glad to have seen it, and he was very supportive.
Thank you, Josie. Well, I realized I had a minor snafu earlier. We do have prize money and complimentary books for everyone who participated in the contest. So if you submitted an entry and you are in the room, do not leave without checking in with WIT and our Veterans for Peace, and we will recognize you with a cash prize and a book. This is the end of our event. We do have food that still needs to be eaten, and you are welcome to continue the conversation with the folks in the room. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you everyone who is joining us via the live stream and Zoom, for all our guests. And thank you so much. All these events and this exhibit would have been nothing without folks in this room and coming into work in the library and seeing people engaged with that exhibit, seeing people in the hallway learning about this important history from the exhibit, but even more so hearing stories like Josie's of learning about history from your family. That's kind of how I've always learned about important history in our family, and I think that's a really important way to learn. So thank you everyone. Do you want to say anything to close with?
No.
No? Okay. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you
yes,
so
Mark?
much. As a reminder, it's still available till December 15th.
Yes, thank you. Yes, the exhibits will still be up through December 15th, maybe even a few days after that, but get there by December 15th. There's exhibits in the library, in room 220 right next door, and then in the hallway through here.
Oh, and yes, I teach the Vietnam War next semester.
I will do 375. Thank you everyone.
All right, so who else is here? Has prize money. Okay, Junie. Thank you. Christy, Isabella, Catherine, Jessica, Sarah. Over here. And who else is here?
I will mail this to Junie.
Okay.
Yeah, sure thing.
All right. We're able to record your responses.
Yeah, sure thing.
I'm sorry for the hiccup.
We should have done it at that time.
I'm Alexander.